as a result between truth and falsehood, justice and injustice, good and evil, right and wrong within every human being. And so the essential struggle of the individual human being as well as the human collective is to resist this pull towards the earth and to turn the attention to the divine. And we find that in one of his most profound speeches, and this is given to the students of the Islamic seminary of the Hawza, where he says that one heart cannot contain two loves. One can either love Allah or love the world, but both loves cannot be contained in the same heart. And he analyzes this. And you know, the Sayyid al-Shaheed was very analytical. It's remarkable how analytical he was. And he goes on to categorize love into single grade and double grade love. So when you go to a gas station, you know, you get regular and you get premium. So he also categorized love accordingly, whereby single grade love is one that his object of love occupies the center of his thoughts, of his feelings and sentiments, but his attention is periodically diverted from this object of love, and you know, ultimately returns to it. The double grade love, you know, this is the premium type. This is sheer love, whereby man's entire attention is drawn to the object of his love, and nothing can divert him from it. And so, in terms of these two categories of love, he says that these apply to both Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the love of Allah, as well as the love of the earth. In terms of the single grade love of Allah, he says that this is, you know, this appears in the hearts of the pious believers, and their sentiments and their feelings and their thoughts are centered on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But from time to time, they are distracted and diverted into their day-to-day mundane activities, whether it's eating or socializing with friends or working. But you know, after they are free from this immediate engagement, their attention goes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the single grade love of Allah. And then there is the double grade love of Allah, which is found in the hearts of the prophets and the Imams alayhimus salam, and it's one that we should strive for, where they never turn away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We find Imam Ali alayhi salam saying, I did not see anything but that I saw Allah before it and after it and with it. So this is the double grade love. But you know, these two categories of love also apply to the love of the world, whereby the love of the world is such that, you know, one's concentration is on the activities and hopes of seeking worldly gains. But you know, from time to time, whenever he sees fit, he diverts his attention from the world towards worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to praying, to fasting. But then he returns back to, you know, attending to his world. So this is, you know, what is the single grade love of the world. But then there's also the double grade love of the world, whereby the love of the world reaches a stage where a man does not see anything but the world. And just as how Imam Ali alayhi salam had that statement, you know, as far as the world is concerned, such a person, you know, sees the world before everything and after everything and with everything. They're infatuated with the world. And so even such a person, if they were to fast, or if they were to pray, or if they were to seek knowledge and convey knowledge, all of that is done for worldly gain, for wealth, for power, for fame. And this is the double grade love of the world. And it's very dangerous. This is where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that love of the world is the root of all evil. And Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salam says that this world is like seawater. The more that one drinks of it, the thirstier they get. And so, you know, we have to look at ourselves as to where do we fall within these categories. And I think by and large most of us probably fall within the single grade love of the world and single grade love of Allah. And obviously our aim is to strive for that double grade love of Allah. That love whereby Imam Ali salam, it so infused him that at the age of 60, in his 60s, he was fighting like a warrior for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at the prime of his youth, he was patient when his rights were deprived. We find that this is the normal equation gets reversed when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes the center object of love, and when one's attention is never deviated from that. So in his 60s he was fighting like a warrior, and in the prime of his youth when his rights were deprived, he was patient. Can you imagine that? So we have thus far spoken primarily on the Sayyid al-Shaheed's thoughts as far as man as prototype, to an extent on the individual level. But one of the most prominent features of all of his works was that he never stopped at the level of discussion of the individual, which he referred to as one-dimensional thinking. He always extrapolated, he always extended his discussion to the level of society. And inshallah I'm going to turn my attention a little bit to that, because just as we refer to the love of Allah and Allah being the ideal, societies too can be defined in terms of their tendencies both towards the material and to the divine. So it's not just individuals, but societies also can be defined in those terms. And the lack of the social level of thinking, if we were to focus only at the level of individual and not attend to the level of society, then what we find is that the Muslim society becomes susceptible to colonization, both political, economic, intellectual, cultural. And so Sayyid al-Shaheed saw and realized that this threat, where it wasn't sufficient to address the maladies of the individual, the society too had to be part of the discourse. And so he exerted tremendous effort towards inoculating the Muslim society by injecting it with the spiritual, the intellectual, and the practical basis for conducting itself according to the perfect ideal. Islam, as the perfect way of life and as a cure to all maladies, applies not only to the individual level but also to the social level. And so what he did was he went about a program of setting up alternative systems for that underpinned by Islamic principles for the management of socio-political, economic arenas. So when he has an elaborate discussion on the ideals of human beings, the ideals of societies, and he divides these ideals into three categories. The first category is what he refers to as the ideals that perpetuate the mundane, that perpetuate the worldly. And so here you find that people either impose upon themselves, or it's externally imposed by a tyrant, certain deities. So either people impose upon themselves this ideal of carnal desires, of worldly gain, or we find on the other hand also tyrants wish to perpetuate the status quo and impose an ideal. So the Quran says, for instance, أَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهُهُ هَوَى. Have you seen one who takes a deity being his lusts? A person who worships the carnal desires. So this is one kind of mundane ideal. And then there is also in another, other verses where the Quran refers to the statement of the Pharaoh, Ana Rabbukum al-A'la, I am your Lord, the Most High. So this is one level of ideals. The carnal desires, or individuals who become ideals and become like deified idols of for ourselves. Then there's a second category of ideals that has some positive aspects, but they're also relative and they are limited in terms of their human aspirations. So, things like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, freedom. These are ideals, and there are positive aspects to them. But Sayyid al-Shaheed also critiques these ideals, because what happens when you achieve them? What next? If you've achieved freedom, what next? And so, he espouses the third ideal, a third ideal which is the absolute ideal. And this is being none other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is what, he has presented as the appropriate ideal for not just the individual, but for society as a whole. The Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being that ultimate ideal to strive for. Because if the ideal of man are limited, so too will their objectives be. And once they attain those objectives, they stagnate. But if their ideals are infinite, if their ideal is unlimited, then the field of man's action and progress is also unlimited. And so man will never stagnate, because that ideal is absolute. That ideal is unlimited. That ideal is infinite. And so this is, what he presents as the essential message of Islam, which has borne the standard of opposition to all false gods and to low ideals. And this is, the true ideal, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the absolute ideal, in fact unshackles man and liberates him from all the bonds of servitude. So, on this basis, let's inshallah wrap up by discussing some of his political and economic thoughts. So again, based on some of the earlier principles that I mentioned, that it's in resistance of the pull of the world and upon the absolute ideal, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Sayyid al-Sadr presents some of his political and economic models. So briefly, in terms of his political, and I won't get into the details because he is fairly rigorous and thorough, but in terms of principle, again going to that absolute ideal, and toward for not just individual but mankind to look towards the divine. The principle here is Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, that there is no God but God, that absolute sovereignty belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that we are to be the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so he says, and I quote, "The enunciation of this truth was the greatest revolution